Chapter 1. Makoto Reis was sitting at his kitchen table at 11:40 at night when his phone buzzed with a photograph that ended his marriage. He didn't know that yet. He just knew his hand was steady when it shouldn't have been. The photo showed his wife, Willow, laughing outside a hotel in Scottsdale. Her head was tilted back, her hand resting on the forearm of a man who was not her husband. The timestamp said 9:14 p.m. Willow had told Makoto she was in Scottsdale for a marketing conference. She had told him she'd be sharing a room with her coworker, Priya, because the company was cutting costs on travel. Makoto looked at the man's face for a long time. He didn't recognize him, not yet. He set the phone face down on the table next to his cold coffee, and he did not cry, and he did not call her, and he did not throw anything. He just sat there in the quiet of the house they had bought together 6 years ago, listening to the refrigerator hum, thinking about the fact that he had genuinely, stupidly, completely trusted this woman. Then he picked the phone back up and looked at the photo again. And for the first time in longer than he could admit, Makoto Reis smiled, not because he was happy. Because something in him, something patient, something that had been quietly waiting for years, finally had a reason to move. He did not confront her that night. He did not confront her the next morning when she came home smelling like airport coffee and told him the conference had gone fine, kind of boring, honestly. He kissed her on the cheek and asked how Priya was doing. Good, Willow said, not missing a beat. She got engaged, actually. That's great, Makoto said. We should send something. Willow smiled at him like he was the easiest man in the world to fool. She had no idea what she had just walked into. Chapter 2. To understand how Willow got here, you have to go back 9 years, to a rooftop bar in Austin, Texas, where a 26-year-old software engineer named Makoto Reis was standing awkwardly near the drink line, and a 24-year-old marketing coordinator named Willow Hart walked up and told him his tie looked like it belonged to somebody's dad. It was my dad's, Makoto said. Willow laughed so hard she had to put her drink down. That was the beginning. It was easy in the beginning. Makoto was the kind of man people underestimated in a good way, quiet in meetings, but the guy everyone went to when something actually needed fixing. Willow was magnetic. She filled rooms. She remembered everyone's birthday and everyone's dog's name, and she made Makoto, who had grown up mostly invisible in a house full of louder siblings, feel like the most interesting person alive. They got married 3 years later at a vineyard outside of Fredericksburg. Makoto's speech made his mother cry. Willow's speech made the whole room laugh, then cry, then laugh again. Everyone said they were perfect for each other. Everyone said it for years. They bought a house in a suburb of Dallas. Makoto moved from a mid-sized tech company into a smaller firm that built infrastructure software, the unglamorous, invisible kind of work that keeps banks and hospitals running. Willow climbed fast at a marketing agency, made director by 31, started traveling more for conferences and client pitches. They had disagreements like every couple. Willow wanted to eat out 4 nights a week. Makoto wanted to save more aggressively. Makoto disappeared into his home office some weekends, debugging something that would only take 20 minutes and would somehow take 5 hours. Willow would get irritated, then bring him a sandwich anyway, sit on the arm of his chair, and ask him to explain what he was doing even though she didn't understand half of it. You don't have to pretend to care, Makoto told her once. I'm not pretending, she said. I like watching you be good at something. He believed her. For a long time he had every reason to. They talked about kids and decided to wait. They talked about moving to Colorado and decided against it. They fought about money exactly twice a year, like clockwork, right around tax season and right around Christmas, and both times they made up within a day because neither of them liked staying angry. By any outside measure, the Reis marriage worked. Neighbors envied it. Willow's mother told her friends her daughter had married a good, steady man. Makoto's coworkers joked that he must be doing something right because his wife still looked at him like that after 7 years. What nobody saw, what nobody could see, was the exact moment. 5 years before that photograph landed on Makoto's phone, when Willow Reis met a man named Daniel Castellano at a conference in Miami, and decided that her steady, quiet, unglamorous husband wasn't enough anymore. Chapter 3. It started small, the way these things almost always do. Willow began saying "we" about a group of coworkers Makoto had never heard of. She started referencing inside jokes from a work trip that seemed to run longer in the telling each time she brought it up. She got a new phone case with a lock screen photo of a beach Makoto didn't recognize, taken from an angle that made it clear someone else had taken it. And when he asked, she said, "Oh, that's from the Miami trip. Priya's boyfriend has a drone." He didn't think much of it. Why would he? 6 months later, Willow's schedule changed. She was traveling once a month instead of once a quarter. She said the agency had landed a new national account, and she was basically running point on the whole West Coast rollout. She started working out more, buying new clothes, coloring her hair a shade lighter. Makoto told her she looked beautiful and meant it, and didn't think to wonder why. A year after that, Makoto noticed she had started sleeping with her phone face down on the nightstand, something she'd never done before. When it buzzed at odd hours, she'd glance at it and put it back down without picking it up, then check it later in the bathroom. None of it on its own meant anything. Makoto knew that. He was an engineer. He understood the danger of pattern matching on insufficient data. A missed call here, a late night there, normal marriages were full of those things. But engineers are also trained to notice when a system starts behaving in ways that don't match its documentation. And somewhere around year 3 of the affair, though he didn't yet know that's what it was, Makoto started quietly keeping a mental log. He didn't do anything with it. Not for a long time. He told himself he trusted her. He told himself that jealousy was ugly and beneath him, and that a good husband didn't go digging through his wife's things like a paranoid teenager. But the log kept growing. The credit card statement with a charge from a hotel in Scottsdale on a weekend she said she was in Chicago. The perfume that wasn't hers. The night she came home and immediately took a shower before dinner, which she never did. The way she'd started flinching, just slightly, when his phone buzzed at the dinner table, like she'd trained herself to be ready for a version of that moment that involved her own phone. Makoto never said a word. Instead, quietly, without telling anyone, he started building something. It began as a private investigator he found through a friend, someone discreet who didn't ask questions about motive. It became a folder on a hard drive that wasn't the family computer. It became conversations with a lawyer during his lunch breaks, conversations he told his assistant were personal errands. It became, eventually, something much bigger than gathering evidence of an affair. Because here is the thing nobody in Makoto's life knew, not even his own mother. 3 years into the affair he hadn't yet confirmed, Makoto Reyes had quietly left the small infrastructure company he worked for, and using a modest inheritance from his grandfather and 2 years of careful, unglamorous saving, had started a company of his own. A boring one, a software company that did fraud detection systems for regional banks, invisible, unsexy. And it turned out extremely valuable to exactly the kind of institutions that pay very well for boring things done reliably. He hadn't told Willow because at first it was nothing, a side project, 2 clients, most nights spent coding after she went to bed. Then it became something. Then it became something he wasn't sure how to bring up without it turning into a conversation about money and control. And who got credit for what? Conversations he'd watched destroy other couples he knew. And then, somewhere in there, without ever consciously deciding to, Makoto stopped wanting to tell her at all. Because some quiet, unspoken part of him had started to suspect that the woman he was building a future for might not be building one back. Chapter 4, Daniel Castellano was 41 years old, drove a Porsche he'd leased and told people he owned, and ran a boutique real estate investment firm in Phoenix that was smaller and shakier than his tailored suits suggested. He had the specific confidence of a man who had never once, in his entire adult life, been told no by a woman he actually wanted. He met Willow at a marketing conference in Miami 5 years earlier. She was there to pitch her agency's services to a room of investors. He was there because his firm had a table at the after-party and free bar tabs made him generous with his business cards. He found her outside on the balcony, alone, scrolling her phone with the specific tired energy of someone who'd smiled professionally for 6 straight hours. "You looked like the only person in that pitch who actually believed what she was saying," he told her. "I did believe it," Willow said. "That's the exhausting part." He laughed, and it was a good laugh, low and easy, and Willow found herself laughing too, and by the end of the night they'd exchanged numbers under the entirely plausible cover story of future business opportunities. It took 4 months for it to become something else. Willow would later tell herself in the specific, self-protective way people do that it just happened. That she hadn't planned it, that one night in a hotel bar after a joint client dinner had simply gotten out of hand. That was not entirely true. Willow had chosen the dress that night. Willow had suggested one more drink. Some quiet, dissatisfied part of her had been waiting for exactly this kind of accident to happen to her. What Willow felt with Daniel in the beginning wasn't really about Daniel at all. It was about the specific, electric feeling of being wanted by someone new, of being seen again after 7 years of being simply, comfortably known. Makoto loved her steadily, predictably, the way you'd love a house you'd lived in for a long time. Daniel looked at her like she was a new car he hadn't finished paying off yet, and for a while, that felt like the more exciting thing to be. She told herself for the first year that it would end. She told herself the same thing the second year. By year 3 she had mostly stopped telling herself anything at all, and had simply built 2 lives that ran in parallel, one in Dallas with a husband who never asked the right questions, and one in hotel rooms and long weekends with a man who told her, constantly, in increasingly specific terms, exactly what their life together would look like once she finally left. He's a good guy, Daniel said once about Makoto, with the particular condescension of a man discussing someone he considers no threat. But he's not enough for you, Will, you know that. You've known that for years. Willow didn't correct him. She let it sit there, comfortable, true enough to swallow. She had no idea that the good guy she'd stopped seeing clearly had spent those same 3 years building a company worth, by that point, more than 4 times what she and Daniel together were worth on paper. She had no idea he had a lawyer on retainer. She had no idea that somewhere in a drawer in his home office, under a false bottom he'd built himself out of a spare hard drive case, was a folder labeled simply W that contained 5 years of receipts, photographs, hotel confirmations, and a private investigator's report thick enough to require a rubber band. Willow believed completely that she was the one in control of this story. She was about to learn otherwise. Chapter 5. The private investigator's name was Renata Cole, a former Dallas PD detective who now did quiet, careful work for people who needed the truth more than they needed drama. Makoto had found her through a co-worker's brother-in-law who'd gone through a messy divorce 2 years earlier. You understand, Renata told him, in a coffee shop far enough from his neighborhood that no one would recognize either of them, that once I find something you can't unfind it. I know, Makoto said. Most people say that and don't mean it. I've had 3 years to think about whether I mean it, Makoto said. Renata studied him for a moment, the calm, unhurried way he said it, no tremor in his voice, no performance of pain for her benefit, and decided he was telling the truth. It took her 6 weeks to confirm what Makoto had already suspected. Willow's West Coast rollout trips correlated, almost perfectly, with a Daniel Castellano who ran a real estate firm out of Phoenix. Hotel records. A joint dinner reservation at a restaurant in Scottsdale under Daniel's name for 2. A gas station security camera 4 states away from where Willow said she'd be that caught her getting out of a car that wasn't a rental. And then finally the photograph outside the hotel. The one that landed on Makoto's phone that Tuesday night, the one Renata had taken herself from across the street with a long lens. The one that showed Willow's hand on Daniel's forearm and the particular tilt of her head that told you everything you needed to know about how comfortable, how practiced this had become. I'm sorry, Renata said, sliding the folder across the table. Makoto looked at it for a long moment before he opened it. Don't be, he said quietly. You just gave me something I've needed for a long time. Confirmation? A start date, Makoto said. Chapter 6. Here is what Willow did not know about her husband in the 5th year of her affair. She did not know that Ray's Fraud Systems, the small company Makoto had started as a side project in their spare bedroom, had grown into a 22-person operation that now handled fraud detection for 11 regional banks across 3 states. She did not know that 6 months ago, a much larger financial technology company had approached Makoto about an acquisition, and that the number they'd offered, an amount Makoto still sometimes had to say out loud to himself to believe it, would be enough to change both of their lives forever. She did not know that Makoto had been advised by his lawyer, a sharp, unsentimental woman named Priscilla Odom, to be very careful about how marital assets were characterized during any acquisition process, given the current circumstances of your marriage. A phrase Priscilla used with the delicate precision of someone who had gently, professionally, already guessed what Makoto hadn't yet said out loud. She did not know that Makoto had spent 18 months quietly restructuring his ownership of the company in ways that were completely legal, completely defensible, and completely devastating to any claim she might one day try to make on it. And she certainly did not know that 3 weeks before that photograph landed on Makoto's phone, he had already begun the process, quietly, carefully, with Priscilla's guidance, of protecting the life he had built. Because some instinct in him, some old, patient, watchful part of his personality that had made him good at debugging systems other people gave up on, had already known, long before Renata Cole confirmed it, that his marriage was not what it appeared to be. Willow believed she held all the power in this marriage. She believed Makoto was a sweet, oblivious man who would be shattered and helpless if he ever found out the truth, a man she could manage, redirect, and eventually leave on her own terms, with her own carefully constructed story about growing apart. She had built her entire secret life on the assumption that her husband was simple. She had never been more wrong about anything. Chapter 7. For 6 weeks after the photograph, Makoto lived 2 lives of his own. At home, he was the same as always, a little quieter maybe, but Willow chalked that up to a stressful stretch at work. He asked about her day. He cooked dinner on Thursdays, their standing tradition. He kissed her good night. Willow had no idea that the man lying next to her had that same week signed paperwork finalizing the sale of 40% of his company for a number with 8 figures in it, structured entirely under his separate ownership, untouched by any joint account they shared. He watched her lie to him with a kind of clinical fascination he wasn't proud of. He watched her say work trip with the exact same warm, unbothered tone she used to say I love you. He noticed, now that he was looking for it, how good she'd gotten at this. How practiced, how many small lies had over 5 years worn themselves smooth like river stones. It should have destroyed him. In some ways it did. There were nights he sat alone in his car in the garage after she'd gone to sleep, just breathing, just trying to hold himself together long enough to walk back inside and act normal. He was not a machine. He loved her, or he loved who he'd believed she was, and grieving that was real, and it hurt in a way he hadn't expected, even with all the evidence sitting in a drawer in his office. But grief and patience, it turned out, could live in the same body. You've been distant, Willow said one night over dinner, studying him with what looked infuriatingly like genuine concern. Work's been a lot, Makoto said. Big project closing soon. You never talk about work anymore. You never ask, Makoto said mildly, and watched her flinch at the accuracy of it before she covered it with a laugh. Fair, she said. Tell me about it. He almost did. He almost, for one strange second, wanted to tell her everything, the company, the acquisition, the money, all of it, because some old part of him still wanted her to be proud of him. He caught himself before the words came out. It's boring bank stuff, he said instead. You'd fall asleep. She smiled and let it go, relieved, the way people are relieved when a subject they don't actually care about gets dropped. Makoto went back to his office that night, opened the drawer with the false bottom and looked at the folder labeled W for a long time. Not yet, he thought, not until everything's in place. Chapter 8. By the time 5 years had passed, Willow had stopped feeling guilty in any active way. Guilt, like most emotions people don't examine, had calcified into something quieter and more manageable. A background hum she'd learned to live around, the way you learn to live around a small, persistent ache in an old injury. She had started in the last several months actively imagining her life without Makoto. Not urgently, not with any real timeline. But the imagining had become more detailed, more architecturally specific. Which of their friends would side with her? Which condo building near Daniel's office had good natural light? How she'd explain the divorce to her mother in a way that made her the sympathetic party. Daniel had started pushing harder. I'm not asking you to blow up your life overnight, he told her one night in a hotel room in Austin, propped up against the headboard watching her get dressed. I'm asking you to stop pretending you don't already know how this ends. It's not that simple, Daniel. It's exactly that simple. You don't love him. You love the idea of not disappointing anyone. That's different. Willow zipped her dress and looked at herself in the mirror rather than at him. You don't know him. I know you talk about him like he's a nice roommate, Daniel said. When's the last time he actually surprised you? When's the last time being with him felt like this? Willow didn't answer because the honest answer, that being with Makoto had never once felt like the electric, dangerous thrill of being with Daniel, and that this had never once meant Makoto loved her less, was too complicated to say out loud in a hotel room at 11 at night. I have an offer on a place in Paradise Valley, Daniel said. 4 bedrooms, pool, I could close by spring. That's not, Daniel, that's not a decision I get to make with you, that's mine. So make it, he said. What are you waiting for? Willow didn't have a real answer. That scared her more than anything Daniel had said. Some part of her, small, buried, easy to ignore most days, understood that she had built a 5-year fantasy on the specific comfort of never having to actually choose, of getting to keep both the safety of her marriage and the thrill of her affair indefinitely, and that Daniel's growing impatience meant the fantasy had an expiration date whether she was ready or not. Give me time, she said. You've had 5 years, Daniel said, not unkindly but not gently either. How much more time do you need? She didn't know, and that more than anything should have frightened her. It didn't. Not yet, because Willow still believed completely that whenever she finally did make her choice, it would be hers to make on her timeline, on her terms, with a husband too trusting and too unremarkable to ever complicate it. She had 6 weeks left to enjoy that belief. Chapter 9. The deal closed on a Tuesday in March. Makoto sat in a glass conference room in downtown Dallas, surrounded by lawyers and bankers in expensive suits, and signed his name to documents that turned 3 years of 80-hour weeks and a marriage he'd quietly stopped trusting into a number that still didn't feel entirely real. Priscilla Odom shook his hand afterward. Congratulations, she said, genuinely. Thank you for everything, Makoto said. You know, Priscilla said carefully, the paperwork's clean, everything's structured the way we discussed. But clean paperwork isn't the same as a clean conscience, Makoto. Whatever you decide to do next on the personal side, that's going to be harder than any of this. Makoto nodded. He'd been thinking the same thing for weeks. He drove home that evening with the top-line number sitting in his head like something he still hadn't found the right shelf for. He thought about calling his mother. He thought about calling his best friend, Tobias, who'd been asking for months why Makoto seemed like he was carrying something heavy he wouldn't put down. Instead, he went home and found Willow in the kitchen making pasta, humming along to something on her phone, looking in that unguarded moment, exactly like the woman he'd fallen in love with on a rooftop in Austin 9 years earlier. For one long, aching second, he almost told her everything. Not to hurt her. Just because some part of him, the part that had loved her honestly for most of a decade, wanted to share this enormous moment with the person who was supposed to be his person. Then his phone buzzed, face down on the counter, and Willow's eyes flicked toward it, quick, automatic, checking whether it might be Daniel calling her by mistake on the wrong phone. A fear she carried so constantly now she didn't even notice herself doing it. And Makoto watched that small, involuntary flinch, and the urge to tell her anything at all disappeared completely. "Big day?" she asked, stirring the pasta. "You could say that," Makoto said. "Tell me about it." He looked at her for a long moment. Later, he said, "Let's just eat." Chapter 10. 3 days after the deal closed, Makoto met with Priscilla again, this time not about the company, but about a divorce filing he'd been quietly preparing for 6 weeks. "You're sure?" Priscilla said. It wasn't really a question. She'd represented enough people in his position to recognize certainty when she saw it. "I'm sure. And you want the filing to include the infidelity documentation? Texas is no fault," Makoto said. "I know that. I don't need it for the divorce itself." "Then why do you want it in there?" Makoto was quiet for a moment. "Because I spent 5 years being the only person in that marriage who didn't know the truth. I'm done being the only one who has to pretend." Priscilla nodded slowly. "There's another approach, you know. Some people in your position choose to handle things privately, quietly. No documentation, no drama, just a clean settlement and a closed door." "I thought about that," Makoto admitted. "For a long time, actually. Willow gets to keep her story, the one where we just grew apart, where nobody did anything wrong, where she gets to walk away and still be the sympathetic one at every dinner party for the rest of her life. And you don't want that." "I don't need her to suffer," Makoto said carefully, working it out as he said it. "I'm not trying to destroy her. I just need her to know that I knew, that I've known for a long time, that the version of me she's been lying to for 5 years wasn't the version that actually existed." Priscilla studied him. "That's not revenge, Makoto, that's just honesty with better timing." "Maybe," Makoto said, "feels like both some days." She slid a folder across the desk, the finalized paperwork. The divorce filing, the financial disclosures that made it unmistakably clear how much the company was now worth and how thoroughly it was protected. And clipped at the back, copies of everything Renata Cole had gathered over 6 weeks of careful, quiet work. "Filing's ready whenever you say the word," Priscilla said. Makoto looked at the folder for a long moment. "Not yet," he said. "One more thing first." Chapter 11. Makoto called Willow on a Thursday and asked her to make sure she was free that Saturday night. No plans, no work trips, nothing. "What's the occasion?" Willow asked. And Makoto could hear, underneath her casual tone, the small note of alarm that had lived in her voice for months now. The automatic flinch of someone who has spent 5 years bracing for a conversation she hopes never actually arrives. "I want to take you somewhere nice," Makoto said. "We haven't done that in a while." "That sounds great," Willow said too brightly. She spent that week telling herself it meant nothing. Married couples had date nights. This was normal, this was fine. She told Daniel, when he asked why she seemed distracted during their call that Wednesday, that Makoto was being sweet for once. And Daniel had made a small, dismissive sound that told her exactly what he thought about that. Saturday night, Makoto took her to Bijou, a small, quiet French restaurant in uptown Dallas they'd gone to on their 5th anniversary. He wore the navy suit she'd always liked. He'd made the reservation for the corner table away from the noise. "This is beautiful," Willow said, looking around, genuinely pleased despite herself. "What's this really about, Makoto? Can't a man take his wife to dinner?" "Not you, not out of nowhere, not on a random Saturday," Willow said, laughing but watching him carefully now. They ordered wine. They talked about small things, her mother's upcoming visit, a leak in the garage roof, a movie they'd been meaning to watch. For a while, it felt almost like the old days, easy and warm, and Willow found herself relaxing into it, telling herself not for the first time that maybe things with Makoto were fine, actually. Maybe this whole exhausting double life could just quietly continue a little longer. Then, over the second course, Makoto set down his fork, folded his hands on the table, and looked at her with an expression she'd never seen on his face before, calm, direct, entirely without anger. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to actually think about your answer before you give it to me." Willow's stomach dropped, though she kept her face composed through years of practice. "Okay, how was Scottsdale?" Makoto asked. The restaurant noise seemed to fall away. Willow felt her pulse in her ears. "What, Scottsdale?" Makoto repeated gently like he was asking about the weather. 9 months ago. You told me you were in Chicago that weekend." Makoto, I don't know what you're don't," Makoto said, still calm, still quiet. "Please, I'm asking you to not do that right now. Not tonight." Willow looked at him for a long, silent moment, and something in his eyes, steady, patient, utterly unsurprised, told her that whatever conversation she thought she was about to have, it was not the one that was actually happening. "How long have you known?" she finally whispered. "Long enough," Makoto said, "that I stopped being angry a while ago and started being something else." Chapter 12. "Say his name," Makoto said quietly. Willow's hands were shaking now, wine glass forgotten in front of her. "Makoto, please, can we just say his name, Willow?" "Daniel," she said, so quietly it was almost lost under the restaurant noise. "His name is Daniel. Daniel Castellano," Makoto said. "Phoenix, real estate, 41, drives a Porsche he leases and tells people he owns." Willow stared at him, something cold spreading through her chest. "You had someone investigate me." "I had someone confirm what I'd already figured out on my own," Makoto said. "There's a difference." "How long?" Willow said again, her voice cracking now, tears starting despite everything. "How long have you known?" 6 weeks with proof," Makoto said. "Longer than that if I'm honest with myself with suspicion. You got sloppy the last year, Willow. Or maybe you just stopped being careful because I never gave you any reason to think I was paying attention. Why didn't you say anything?" Willow's voice rose, sharp now, something like anger cutting through the shame. 6 weeks, Makoto. You sat across from me at dinner every night for 6 weeks knowing and you said nothing." Makoto looked at her steadily. "You spent 5 years doing exactly that to me. Every single night, I figured I could manage 6 weeks. The words landed like a slap. Willow opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. It's not the same thing. You're right," Makoto said. "It's not. Because I never once lied to you, Willow. Not about where I was. Not about who I was with. Not about anything." "So what is this?" Willow said, wiping at her eyes furiously, aware of the couple at the next table glancing over, not caring anymore. Are you punishing me? Is this some kind of game?" "This is dinner," Makoto said. "You wanted to know what this was about. This is what it's about. I know everything, Willow. I've known for a while. And I need you to understand something before this conversation goes any further." He reached into his jacket and set a folder on the table between them, thin, unremarkable, the kind of folder that could have held anything. "What is that?" Willow said, staring at it like it might be dangerous. "Open it," Makoto said, "or don't, but you should know what's inside before you decide what you're going to say next." Chapter 13. Willow's hands trembled as she opened it. On top was a photograph, the one from Scottsdale, her hand on Daniel's forearm, a moment she remembered perfectly and had believed completely that no one else on earth had ever seen. Beneath it, page after page. Dates, hotel confirmations, credit card records with the transactions highlighted. A printed summary in careful, professional language that Willow understood with a sick lurch was a private investigator's report. 5 years laid out with the clinical precision of an audit. "Oh my God," Willow whispered. "There's more," Makoto said, "but I didn't think you needed to see all of it tonight." Willow looked up at him, her face pale. "What are you going to do with this?" "That depends," Makoto said, "on what happens in the next part of this conversation. Because there's something else you need to know, and I think you should hear it from me before you hear it from anyone else." He reached into the folder and pulled out one more document, a single page, far less dramatic looking than everything else, but the one that mattered most. "I sold my company 3 days ago," Makoto said. "Ray's Fraud Systems. You remember I mentioned it years ago as a side project. It stopped being a side project a long time ago, Willow. It's been a real company for 3 years, 22 employees, 11 bank clients, and 3 days ago I sold 40% of it to a company called Meridian Financial Technologies." Willow stared at him, uncomprehending. "What are you talking about? You work at—" "I haven't worked at Halbrook Systems in 2.5 years, Makoto said. "I told you I got a promotion that kept me busier. That wasn't exactly a lie. It also wasn't exactly the truth." He slid the last document toward her. Willow looked down at the number on the page, the closing figure from the acquisition, and felt the entire room tilt sideways. That can't be real." "It's real," Makoto said. "And it's entirely mine. Separately owned, separately structured, built and funded years before either of us knew what we were actually dealing with in this marriage. My lawyer made sure of that a long time ago, before I even had proof about you. Honestly, some part of me must have known before I let myself know." Willow's mouth opened and closed. For the first time in 5 years, she had absolutely nothing to say. "I'm not telling you this to hurt you," Makoto said quietly. "I'm telling you because I spent 5 years being the person in this marriage who didn't get to know the truth. I'm not doing that anymore. Not about you, not about me, not about any of it." "Makoto," Willow whispered, and it came out broken real, the first completely honest thing she'd said to him in longer than either of them could count. I don't know what to say to you right now." "You don't have to say anything tonight," Makoto said, standing, straightening his jacket, calm in a way that felt, to Willow, more devastating than any amount of shouting could have been. "My lawyer will be in touch this week. I'd suggest you get one of your own." He set enough cash on the table to cover the bill and left a tip that was, even in that moment, exactly what he would have left on any other night. Then he walked out of the restaurant, into the warm Dallas night and left Willow sitting alone at the table where 9 years and one lifetime ago he had once believed they would grow old together. Chapter 14. Willow didn't remember driving home. She sat in the driveway for 20 minutes before she could make herself go inside, and when she did, the house felt different, smaller somehow, like it already knew something had ended. She called Daniel first. It felt like the natural thing to do, the person she'd built an entire second life around, the person who was supposed to be waiting for exactly this moment. He knows, she said the second Daniel picked up. Makoto knows everything. There was a pause on the line, and something in that pause a half-second too long, a hesitation that hadn't been there in any of their previous conversations, told Willow something was wrong before Daniel even spoke. Okay, Daniel said carefully. Okay, well that's actually good, right? That's what we wanted eventually. This just speeds things up. He knows how much money he has now, Daniel. He sold his company. It's more than either of us has ever seen, and he protected it, all of it, legally, before he even had proof about me. Another pause, longer this time. Well, Daniel said, and Willow heard with a clarity that made her feel physically ill, something shift in his voice. A recalibration, quick and cold, the sound of a man doing math. That doesn't really change anything for us, does it? I mean financially. You weren't with him for his money. That's not what I'm, Daniel. I'm telling you my marriage just ended in the most humiliating way possible and you're asking about. I'm asking because we've been planning a future together. Willow, and I think it's fair to understand what that future actually looks like now. Willow sat down slowly on the edge of her bed, phone pressed to her ear, and felt something that had been comfortably numb for 5 years suddenly, completely wake up. You don't actually love me, she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Willow, come on, you love the idea of me leaving him for you. That's different. That's what you said about him and me, remember. That's exactly what this is, isn't it? Daniel didn't answer right away, and the silence was its own confession. I need to go, Willow said, and hung up before he could say anything else. She sat alone in the house she'd shared with Makoto for 6 years. In the marriage, she'd spent 5 of those years quietly, methodically destroying and cried, not for Daniel, not really, and not even entirely for Makoto, but for the specific, disorienting shock of discovering that the man she'd believed to be simple, trusting, and easy to manage had, this entire time, been the most careful, most patient, most quietly formidable person in either of their lives. Chapter 15, the divorce filing went through 6 weeks later. Texas being a no-fault state, the legal grounds were simple insupportability, the polite legal fiction that let both sides avoid a courtroom fight over blame. But the financial disclosures were not simple, and not quiet, because once Priscilla Odom filed the paperwork, the evidence Renata Cole had gathered didn't stay contained the way Willow had hoped it might. It wasn't Makoto who let it slip. He never told a single mutual friend about the affair, never posted anything, never gave anyone the satisfaction of hearing him complain about what happened. But divorces involving that much money attract lawyers, and lawyers talk to other lawyers. And within 2 months, most of their shared circle in Dallas knew enough of the real story to understand that Willow Reyes had not, in fact, simply grown apart from her husband. Priya, the coworker Willow had used as an alibi for years without ever telling her she was doing it, found out from a mutual friend and confronted Willow in the office parking lot, furious in a way that surprised them both. You used my name, Priya said. For years, Willow. Do you understand what that means? If Makoto had ever called me or come to something with you and me, I would have had no idea what to say. You put me in that position without ever asking. I'm sorry, Willow said and meant it, though the apology felt small against the size of what she'd actually done. I don't think you understand yet how much of this you're going to lose, Priya said not unkindly before walking away. Not just him, all of it, slowly, that's usually how it happens. She was right. Willow's mother, when she finally learned the truth, was quietly, devastatingly disappointed in a way that hurt worse than any shouting match could have. 2 of Willow's closest friends, women who'd been in her wedding, stopped returning her calls with the same frequency. Not out of some dramatic moral stand, just a slow, natural drift that happens when people realize they don't entirely trust someone's version of events anymore. Daniel, for his part, called twice more in the weeks after the divorce filing became public. Once to ask, with startling directness, whether Willow was going to receive a real settlement from the divorce, and once, 3 weeks later, to tell her, in a tone that had gone from warm to businesslike with alarming speed, that he'd started seeing someone else, a real estate attorney from his own social circle, and that he thought it was better for both of them if they stopped talking. Willow didn't argue. There was nothing left in her to argue with. Chapter 16. Makoto moved into a townhome closer to downtown Dallas, smaller than the house but entirely his, filled with furniture he'd chosen himself for the first time in almost a decade. He kept working, though the acquisition money meant he no longer needed to in the same urgent way. He stayed on as CEO of what remained of Ray's fraud systems, partly because he loved the work, and partly because it had become the one part of his life that had never once betrayed him. He told his mother the truth over dinner one night, all of it, and watched her face move through shock, then fury, then a fierce protective pride that made him laugh for the first time in months. "You built all of that," she said, "and you never told any of us, not even me." "I didn't know how to tell you about the company without telling you why I was building it," Makoto admitted. "And I wasn't ready to talk about the why." "You should have told me," his mother said, taking his hand across the table. "Not for the money, for you, you shouldn't have carried all of that alone." "I know," Makoto said quietly. "I think some part of me needed to do it alone, though. I think that was the only way I knew how to survive it." His best friend Tobias took the news the way Tobias took most things, with a long, stunned silence, followed by a string of profanity, followed by insisting on buying Makoto a very expensive dinner, to properly process the fact that you've apparently been secretly rich for 3 years, while I complained to you about my Honda's transmission. Makoto laughed more in that dinner than he had in the previous year combined. He went to therapy, eventually, at Tobias's insistent urging, and spent months untangling the specific, complicated grief of losing a marriage he'd already emotionally left long before the paperwork made it official. It wasn't simple. Even calm, patient men carry pain. Makoto's had simply been building quietly, methodically, the same way everything else in his life had, for 5 years before anyone else saw it. "You're allowed to have been hurt by this," his therapist told him in one of their early sessions. "Building a company and protecting your assets doesn't mean you weren't also devastated. Those two things can both be true." "I know," Makoto said. "I think I used the first one to survive the second one." "That's a very human thing to do," his therapist said. "It's also worth learning to survive things without needing to build an empire every time." Makoto laughed at that quietly and thought she was probably right. Chapter 17. A year after the divorce was finalized, Makoto stood in the small backyard of his townhome, grilling for a handful of friends on a warm Saturday evening, laughing at something Tobias had said, when his phone buzzed with a text from a number he still had saved, unable to bring himself to delete, under the name Willow. "I heard about the Series B round. Congratulations, you deserve it. I hope you're doing well, Makoto, I mean that." He looked at it for a long moment. He'd heard through the slow, unavoidable gossip of a shared social circle that Willow had moved to Austin, that things with Daniel had ended badly and publicly not long after the divorce, that she'd started therapy of her own, that she seemed, by most accounts, to be trying, genuinely, for the first time in a long time, to understand how she'd become a person capable of doing what she'd done for 5 years. Makoto didn't hate her. That had surprised him. In the months after everything settled, he'd expected the anger to last longer, to calcify into something permanent, and instead it had slowly, unevenly, faded into something closer to a distant, complicated sadness. He didn't wish her harm. He simply, finally, didn't need anything from her anymore, not an apology, not an explanation, not a single other thing. He typed a short reply, "Thank you. I hope you're doing well too." Then he put the phone away and walked back over to the grill, where Tobias was arguing with someone about whether pineapple belonged on a burger. And a woman named Alina, a structural engineer he'd met at a friend's wedding 4 months earlier, sharp and funny in a way that reminded him, pleasantly, of nothing at all from his old life, was laughing at the absurdity of the debate, glancing over at him like she wanted him to weigh in. "Well," Alina said, "pineapple, yes or no?" "Depends on the burger," Makoto said, walking over, feeling, for the first time in longer than he could remember, entirely and simply present. "That's a very diplomatic non-answer." "I'm an engineer," Makoto said. "We like to gather all the data before we commit to a position." Alina laughed, and it was easy, uncomplicated, nothing like the careful, watchful years that had come before it. For 5 years, Willow had believed she held all the power in their marriage, that her husband was too trusting, too ordinary, too safe to ever truly threaten her. She had been wrong about almost everything else, but she had been most wrong about that. Makoto's real victory in the end was never really about the money, or the folder in the drawer, or the look on Willow's face across that restaurant table. It was this, a warm evening, good friends, a woman who made him laugh without any history standing between them, and the quiet, steady understanding that he had never once needed to become someone else to survive what happened to him. He had simply finally become fully himself. The end.